my channel. I'm Mix Quill Walker, and today we're going to be talking about some things you can do with social studies with your students. So, I'm in a class this semester. Again, it's another gamified course, and we learned about how to teach sourcing to children because a lot of times you don't think about that, but a lot of times having those like documents can be really fun for kids. So that's what we're going to try and do today. So we'll be covering how to do corroboration and sourcing specifically. So let's talk about those definitions. Corroboration is talking about considering like details across multiple sources to determine to compare them. It's like what is points of agreement, what's points of disagreement. So the one we were talking about which battle? The Battle of Concord, and how there's differing points of views over who fired the first shots, and no one's like entirely sure exactly who fired those first shots. So I'll probably use that example today for that, and we'll double that up with sourcing, as these sources are definitely good ones. So sourcing is again telling you to look at a document as well as like what led to its creation, what are the points of views that the person who made the document had, what events are happening that could have affected this. Are they lying? Do they have a point of view? Are they biased about it? I don't know, let's find out. So beginning with corroboration. So with that, let's look at this poster that I looked at in my class. I'll be adding that in a little bit later, as soon as it'll load. Okay, so a corroboration poster is going to be linked in the description, and it's a poster for those who cannot see it currently. It's a black and white poster, majority of it, and there's a band at the top in burgundy that says Corroboration, Corroboration, and it's got the questions that you're supposed to ask with that. So it says, what do other documents say about this? Do the documents agree? If not, why? What are other possible documents? What documents are the most reliable? And those are the questions you should be asking with corroboration. Continuing off that point, I'm going to pull up that Battle of Concord information a little bit later on for when I'll do like a practice one to show you kind of what you want your students to do. And before that, let's move on to sourcing, shall we? So with sourcing, it's going to be another poster. And with that, here we go. Sourcing. Alright, with sourcing, it's the same style poster with the burgundy banner and the black and white for the rest of it. So it says, before you read the document, you need to ask yourself these things. Who wrote it? What's the author's perspective? Why was it written? When was it written? Where was it written? And is it reliable? Why or why not? So those are our two posters that we're looking at to kind of use in this reasoning. Let me now pull up that lovely Battle of Concord activity we can do. Okay, so with the Battle of Concord, you've got, here we go. So we're going to, instead of the Battle of Concord, we're going to actually look into the first Thanksgiving. I'll screen share, and then we'll continue from there. So, originally I was going to show a thing on the first Thanksgiving and the painting that was made for that. I'm going to not use that. I'm going to try and find the documents that we used to look at the Battle of Concord, Lexington, to talk about the shots heard around the world and what you can see with that. I'll probably pull some things off Twitter that I've seen before, and we'll just kind of examine those things as an example of what you can do with your students. Sorry for the trouble. So, again, I've been having some technical difficulties. I can't pull this up as a normal document or normal file. So I'm just going to show you through my school website. So it's on the Battle of Lexington, like we were talking about. So the first thing, the way you would start out your lesson would be like, oh, what do you know about this? And you give them some time, maybe set up a Padlet for them to interact with, maybe use some form of hyperdoc to let them interact on their own speed, unless you want to do it as like a class-wide activity. I'm going to model it as if it's a class-wide activity. So what you'll do is you'll be like, all right, Battle of Lexington, what do you know? And you'll grab a marker and you'll stand at the board or next to Promethean board and pull up a piece of thing where you can write, here's what we know. So it's what do you know, what do you want to know, and then at the very end you'll do a summary of what did you learn. A good KWL chart's always nice. So once you've done that activity, you'll be like, oh, so shots heard around the world, cool. You don't know anything, that's fine, we're going to learn a lot. Get them really excited to learn. So then you'll move on. You're like, all right, so let's talk about what happened at the Battle of Lexington. And this would open you up to do a lecture on it. You're like, okay, so the Battle of Lexington is the point where the Revolutionary War really kicked off. It's where British soldiers and the American militia at that point really started to fight. And you'd go into that using hopefully a PowerPoint of some kind. So then you'd be like, all right, so now that you know what happened, let's look at these images. So let me really quickly zoom in. Alrighty. So again, I've been having some technical difficulties, so you're not going to see the whole photo. Let me summarize it as the, let's see if this will work. Okay, there we go. So let's summarize it as, again, what do you see here? You look at it, and you've got to look at, eventually on the next slide, you'll see who made it, where does it come from, but here's our image one. So you see a big house, you see a tree, you see another building. Oh, look, the smoke's kind of obscuring the British people. There's people dying, all sorts of things along those lines. You ask them to point out, what do they see? Like, do these guys look happy? Are they running away? What's going on? And you let the kids kind of like start exploring it. So like when my class was doing it as an example, we talked about how they look super dirty and how these guys look so perfectly clean, and this side's covered in mud and that side is not, and you can see behind it there's more soldiers inside of the town, and we went into that kind of thing. So then we'd scroll and it'd be like, all right, so let's look at these questions. What do you see in the image? What evidence does it provide about what happened at the Battle of Lexington? Well, in this one, you'd go into that. It's like, oh, it looks like the British are coming from the town, so they must have attacked first, right? Or someone could throw it the opposite direction. The Americans are approaching the town, thus they must have attacked first. And you kind of go through that side of things. So then you move on to image two. Here's our second image. What do you see here? You see British soldiers inside. You see the tree. You see the houses. There's people fleeing. They're all running away. What is going on? So then you'll continue the next slide and actually talk about the image. So let's look at these specific things. What participants? Do you see a location? What's going on with the colonists versus the British troops? Who's the casualties? Do you see any first? Can you figure out who's fired the first shot? And you go into that from here. I know when our people were doing it, we didn't see any women or children. It's just the men and the soldiers. And then we also noticed the soldiers were all the way in the town. And we went through that. So then you move on to, let's talk about how they're similar. And you talk about it because they look similar. And you go through those similarities. Like, oh, you see the colonists and the British in both. There's no women or children. You see the tree. One's got leaves, though, and one does not. And you see the houses/buildings. It talks about how you see the colonists dying, and you don't really see that with the British. And those are like some similarities they might point out. Let your class be really organic with it. So then let's look at this. Let's look at who made them and when. So let's start with this first image. That was made by Henry Sandum in 1886, while our second image was made by Amos Doolittle in 1775. Well, this one is from closer to that time period than this one. So what does that tell us? Is one more trustworthy than the other then? What's going on? And we discuss that and talk about like maybe why. So I'll pull up another tab and talk about that Battle of Concord and who this person is and who this person is. We're going to continue with the PowerPoint for now to make sure it's not already, the information isn't already there. Okay, so it's not there. So let's look them up. So let's start with Henry Sandum. So Henry Sandum. Alright, Henry Sandum. Slide the screen over again. Alright, Henry Sandum was a Canadian painter. So what's the first problem there? The fact that an American painting was made by a Canadian painter and illustrator. He, I believe, let's look up his painting. Battle of Lexington. Alrighty, so let's find out why he might have painted this, because you never know. I believe when we were looking it up, he was paid to paint it for an organization. I'll have to look that back up, but I'm fairly certain that's what it is. It was made in it was made in the 1800s, and then it was on the 1775. So if you're looking at it, it talks about more from the Library of Congress. It gives you, like, you know, where the original is. So items digitized. Let's see. Let's go back real quick. Why did he paint it? Okay, so I don't remember again the exact group that commissioned it. Maybe I can find it. Let's see. Let's try this. Here we go. Alright, here's our information that I was looking for. So our Canadian artist Henry Sandum made the first image in 1886. The Lexington Historical Society paid him to commemorate the heroism of their forefathers, while Thomas Doolittle, a silversmith, made the second image engraving in fall of 1775. Tells us that he was a member of the Connecticut militia that was called to Cambridge, Massachusetts following this battle. He talked to the people at the battle. Afterwards, he created the engravings. So let's talk about the importance of that, is what you would say to your class. You'd be like, okay, so now that we've looked at that, why is this so important? Why does it matter that they were so different? And you discuss that. It's like, yeah, it's very true. Amos Doolittle does have a bias, and so does Henry Sandum, but his was likely to be more true to the events that occurred because he interviewed it, be a secondary source. While if you move on to the let's move to the questions, actually. Alright, so here's our documents that we'd look at in relation to these paintings and this topic. So if you look at this one, it's by someone called Barker, John Barker, an officer in the Army. So I'll read it aloud just to make things a little easier. So you've got document A. 19th, at 2 o'clock, we began our march by wading through a very long ford up to our middles. After going a few miles, we took 3 or 4 people who were going off to give intelligence. About 5 miles on this side of a town called Lexington, which lay in our road, we heard there were some hundreds of people collected together, intending to oppose us. At 5 o'clock, we arrived there and saw a number of people, I believe between 200 and 300, formed in a common in the middle of the town. We still continued advancing, keeping prepared against an attack, though without intending to attack them. But on our coming near them, they fired 1 or 2 shots, upon which our men, without any orders, rushed in upon them, fired, and put them to flight. We then formed on the common, but with some difficulty. The men were so wild that they could hear no orders. We waited a considerable time there, and at length proceeded on our way to Concord. Source: it's an entry for April 19th, 1775, from the diary of Lieutenant John Baker, an officer in the British Army. While document B would be the side of the colonists, again modified from the original to be a little easier for children to consume. This is we, Nathaniel Mulligan, Philip Russell, followed by the names of 32 other men present on Lexington Green on April 19th, 1775, all of lawful age and inhabitants of Lexington and the county of Middlesex, do testify and declare that on the 19th of April, about 5 o'clock in the morning, Hearing our drumbeat, we proceeded towards the green and soon found that a large body of troops were marching towards us. Some of our company were coming to the green and others had reached it, at which time the company began to disperse. While our backs were turned on the British troops, we were fired on by them, and a number of our men were killed instantly and wounded. Not a gun was fired by any person in our company on the British soldiers, to our knowledge, before they fired on us, and continued firing until we had all made our escape. This was written in Lexington, April 25th, in Lexington on April 25th, 1775. It was sworn by 34 Minutemen on April 25th, 1775, before 3 justices of the peace. So, what you talk about here would be, what's the importance of this? Like, okay, you've got our 2 documents. One from the British Army, one from the colonists. What's the importance of these 2 documents? What similarities do you see? What differences do you see? Seems like everyone agrees it happened on the 19th, but there's a lot of fighting going on about what happened between the pair and who fired first. Who do you believe? Can you tell me why? Let's look at the questions you've got to go with this. Or I've got, I guess. Alright, so you would go through it and you'd look at this for document A. And this one would be for document B. We're going to focus specifically on sourcing, and we'll go through the whole questions, but we're going to focus on sourcing right now. So you would answer this technically before reading the document. I skipped ahead a little bit because I wanted to show you the document itself. But this is what you would do with your students. You'd be like, all right, who was John Barker? What kind of document is this? When was this written? And what do you predict the document to say? This would be a good, like, okay, let's think on this. What's going on here? Who are we looking at? What point of view will we see here for the students who are going to be answering these questions? It's great for, in this case, to do them in groups, probably by table, depending on age, but you can let them pair up if you wanted to. So then you would move on to, all right, so according to this document, what happened to the Battle of Lexington? Let's not talk about what actually happened. Let's talk about what the document says happened. According to the document, who fired the first shot at the Battle of Lexington? And you'd write that answer down. And then finally, you'd talk about the reliability. So is it trustworthy? Why or why not? Talk about it. Discuss it with your group, and then we'll discuss it as a class and bring it together to argue our points about which one's more reliable. So then you move on to document B, and it'd be like, who authored this? What kind of document is it? When was it written? What do you think this document will say? And this will be the same types of question as before. But then you're going to look at comparing them more. So what details do they have in common? What details are different? And then finally be like, is this a trustworthy account of what occurred? Why or why not? And then I would say, I'd add on to it. I'd compare the 2 to the paintings that we saw, specifically whichever one the kids were more inclined to trust. Like, all right, let's discuss what happened in the battle and in these documents compared to these paintings or pieces of artwork, and go into that. So our class would have used the first painting, the one by Amos Doolittle, the earlier painting, not first. And then, but I don't know, maybe your class will compare it to Henry Sandum. Your goal here is to get them talking about the history of what happened, and how that's going to affect this art, and how this art is going to affect the point of view of others. And that's how you move forward with the information. That would be how you ran a lesson with it, whether you're online or not. You'd be sharing your screen if it was online and setting them into breakout rooms and things along those lines. While if you're in person, you're going to do it as a group activity and a group project. So let's talk about what you can do as a project with this. Let's divide the class. There's an answer. You can divide the class up and you're like, all right, using this document, you're going to be a member of that group. Whether you're going to work with the British or you're going to work with the colonists, you'll be focusing on that document. Write your own version of what happened based on this document, based on the painting, and based on what other reading you've done / research that you will do, depending on if you want it to be a week-long project where they're really exploring in depth, and then Friday would be a presentation day, or whether you had them do homework by reading through the textbook, which I would probably not do, but I'd have them, likely what I'd have them do is I'd say, all right, look at what we've learned so far this year. How were the British? How are the Americans? I want you to look at your document, and I want you to look at the painting, and I want you to look at this painting, and I'd find one from an opposite point of view, maybe the British, and I'd say, all right, looking at these things, write your own entry of what happened at the Battle of Concord, and we'll share it on Friday and see whose makes the most sense. And that would be how I finished up the lesson. Finally, after those, I'd be like, all right, based on all this, let's pull out that KWL chart from the beginning of the week and let's fill out that learn section. What did you learn? What did you really enjoy learning? And continue questioning them in that line of thinking. Another thing I like to do, I call them Cram Notes. So basically, they'll take it at the end of the unit/lesson or whatever, likely the unit, and they'll take a piece of paper pretty big, maybe about 3 times the size of a normal piece of paper, maybe 2 times, just depends on what paper you've got. And you'll say, all right, on this paper, I want you to write everything you think is important from this unit/lesson, depending on which you choose to do. I tend to do unit for my own notes because then I can pack more things, and then that's like a good review section, because if they can't remember something, then they'll be like, oh, I should look at this again in my notes and write it down on my Cram Notes and continue with that. You don't have to call them Cram Notes. You can call them, like, as I will if I'm with little kids, mission briefings. Whatever you want to do, make it fun, make it entertaining. Don't just give them busy work to work on sourcing and corroboration. You want them to enjoy doing it so that they'll do it more easily in the future. They'll remember what they learned and continue from there. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.